Midnight. Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in American history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. 020. In Savannah, Georgia, the first reports began to circulate on a surprisingly mild December morning in 1789. The Ellsworth plantation, approximately 17 miles northwest of the city proper, had fallen silent. Despite the winter chill, no smoke rose from its chimneys. Among the dormant cotton fields, no field hands moved. 044, as if abandoned, the property stood, though everyone knew the wealthy Ellsworth family should have been preparing for the Christmas season. Master Jonathan, his wife Martha, who was visiting relatives in Charleston, and their two daughters, Elizabeth and Sarah, alongside their 23 enslaved workers, were expected. After noticing the absence of activity for nearly 3 days, a neighboring plantation owner, Thomas Hargrove, dispatched 2 of his men to investigate, according to county records accessed in 1962. 116, 4 generations to come throughout the South. What these men discovered would become the subject of whispered conversations. The main house stood unlocked, its front door slightly ajar despite the season. Inside, the hearth was cold. Set for 3, Master Jonathan and his daughters, the dining table held no served meal. 138, no signs of struggle, no blood, no evidence of violence. An overwhelming silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the house settling, was reported by the men. According to their accounts, later recorded by the parish minister, most disturbing was the faint, lingering smell. They described it as sickeningly sweet, like meat gone bad in summer heat, but different somehow. 203, reportedly, one of the men, James Whitaker, refused to enter the kitchen house at all, claiming the odor was strongest there. Throughout Chatham County, the Ellsworth plantation was known for its prosperity. From his father in 1770, Jonathan Ellsworth had inherited the property and through aggressive expansion and the acquisition of additional enslaved workers, had nearly doubled its production of cotton and tobacco. 231, a testament to the family's wealth and position in society, stood the Georgian-style main house with its imposing columns and sweeping veranda. From the time, local records described Jonathan as a man of considerable means and influence, frequently hosting gatherings for other plantation owners and local officials. From one of Charleston's oldest families came Martha Ellsworth, née Blackwood. 259, their marriage in 1773 had been well documented in the social pages of both the Savannah Gazette and Charleston Mercury, a union of 2 prominent Southern families that promised to secure their positions for generations. Their only surviving children were Elizabeth, born in 1774, and Sarah, born in 1776. Records indicate Martha suffered several miscarriages in subsequent years. Initially documented as a disappearance was what followed the discovery. 330, without a trace, the Ellsworth family seemed to have vanished, along with a woman named Mercy, a house slave who had been with the family for 15 years. In their quarters, the other enslaved persons remained, each claiming no knowledge of what had transpired in the main house. Or at least that was their official testimony. 351, appointed to investigate the disappearance, Magistrate William Pendleton conducted extensive interviews with everyone on the property. A puzzling consistency in the testimonies is revealed in his notes, preserved in county archives until 1963. The same sequence of events was reported by every enslaved person questioned. As usual, Master Ellsworth and his daughters had taken their evening meal on December 10. Mercy had served them. 418, to their rooms, the family had retired. By morning, they were gone, and Mercy informed the household that the master and his daughters had departed early to join Mrs. Ellsworth in Charleston. In his official report, Pendleton wrote, "The unanimity of these accounts suggests either remarkable truth or remarkable collusion." 441, having interviewed 23 individuals separately, I find it difficult to believe they could maintain such consistency if fabricating their accounts. There, the investigation might have ended another mysterious disappearance in the still wild American South had it not been for what was discovered in the spring of 1790 when the plantation was being prepared for sale. 505, by then, Martha Ellsworth had reluctantly accepted that her family was gone. She remained in Charleston, unable to face returning to the property, and authorized its sale through correspondence preserved in the Charleston County Records Office. During courthouse renovations in 1963, according to documents uncovered, a worker clearing the root cellar found 3 gold rings buried in the earthen floor. 531, one large signet ring bore the Ellsworth family crest, and 2 smaller rings with delicate engravings precisely matched the descriptions of rings known to be worn by Jonathan Ellsworth and his daughters. In Savannah, the worker, a former slave named Samuel, reportedly tried to sell the rings, but was arrested when the jeweler recognized the Ellsworth crest. 554, to a more thorough investigation of the property, this led. The local magistrate, William Pendleton, returned to the plantation and ordered a complete search of the grounds. A methodical examination of every structure on the property is detailed in his handwritten notes, preserved in the Georgia State Archives until 1965, when they were transferred to microfilm. 616, particularly on the kitchen house, the search focused. To reduce fire risk, as was common in southern plantations, it was a separate structure behind the main house. Approximately 50 yards from the main residence stood the kitchen house. A substantial brick structure with a large hearth, work tables, and storage areas for foodstuffs and utensils. 638, it was here that the enslaved cook, known only as Old Sarah in the records, prepared meals for the Ellsworth family with the assistance of Mercy and occasionally other house slaves. Signs of recent thorough cleaning were shown by the building, according to Pendleton's notes. The floors had been scrubbed, the hearth cleared and relaid, and all utensils neatly arranged. 702, in the large copper rendering kettle used for making soap and candles, investigators found what they believed to be human bone fragments, small and brittle, almost completely broken down. According to the parish record, these fragments were no larger than a man's thumbnail and bore the unmistakable porosity of human remains. 725, how the kettle, though seemingly cleaned, contained residue in its seams and around its rivets is described in Pendleton's notes. Residue that, when examined by a local physician, Dr. Thomas Blackwood, a cousin of Martha Ellsworth, was determined to be consistent with the rendering of organic material of substantial mass. 746, disturbing detail is provided in Dr. Blackwood's report, included as an appendix to Pendleton's investigation. The fragments appear to be human in origin, most likely from the smaller bones of the hand or foot, though the extensive breakdown of the material makes positive identification difficult, he wrote. The rendering process, when applied to organic material, effectively separates fat from protein and breaks down tissue through sustained heat. 814, the remnants found suggest this process was carried to near completion. As a suspected murder, the disappearance was reclassified. Throughout Georgia and South Carolina, notices were posted offering a reward for information about Mercy's whereabouts. These notices, reproduced in the Savannah Morning News Historical Archives, described her as female, approximately 26 years of age, small in stature, bearing a small scar above her right eyebrow, and believed dangerous. 849, no responses to these notices were ever recorded. From public attention, the case gradually faded as newer tragedies and concerns occupied the rapidly developing region. At a significantly reduced price to the Henderson family in late 1790, the Ellsworth plantation was sold. During their first years of residence, they reported no unusual occurrences, though servants consistently refused to work in the kitchen house after sunset. 916, this peculiarity is mentioned in a letter from Catherine Henderson to her sister in Virginia, dated October 1791 and preserved in the Virginia Historical Society collection. The Negroes we purchased with the property are largely obedient and hardworking, but exhibit a strange reluctance to enter the kitchen house after dark. 938, when pressed for explanation, they become mute or offer vague references to bad air or unhappy spirits. Mr. Henderson dismisses this as superstition, but I confess the building brings me no comfort either. We have begun construction of a new kitchen closer to the house, which I hope will put an end to these difficulties. 10 o'clock, into history as simply another plantation tragedy, the story might have faded had a package not arrived at the Savannah Historical Society in 1952. A thin leather-bound journal, purportedly written by a woman named Mercy, was contained in the package. Through generations of a family that had migrated to Ohio in the early 1800s, The journal had allegedly been passed down. 1026, according to the accompanying letter, signed only a friend of truth, the family had no direct connection to Mercy but had received the journal from an elderly woman who claimed to have harbored Mercy briefly during her escape. The letter stated, "This document has remained in our family's possession for over 150 years. 1047, the time has come for the truth to be known, though I fear the world may not yet be ready to face it. My ancestor, Rebecca Thompson, assisted a woman fleeing Georgia in the early months of 1790. This woman entrusted her with the enclosed journal before continuing her journey westward. Rebecca was instructed to preserve it but never to make it public during her lifetime. 1111, that prohibition has been honored through 7 generations. I now place it in your hands, believing that sufficient time has passed for the truth to be told." From public view until 1968, the Savannah Historical Society kept this document, when a graduate student researching slave narratives was granted limited access. 1134, from the archives, the document has since disappeared, with only the student's notes remaining as evidence of its contents. Our only window into Mercy's thoughts and experiences are provided by these notes, stored in Box 47 of the University of Georgia's Special Collections. According to these notes, a story far more complex and disturbing than the official record suggested was told by the journal. 12 o'clock, written in a hand that showed evidence of someone who learned to write in secret, with irregular letter formations and inconsistent spelling, the journal documented life at the Ellsworth plantation from approximately 1785 to December 1789. Reportedly, the first entry, dated simply summer 1785, read, "Today I begin this record, though I know not who will ever read it. Perhaps no one. 1226, perhaps only God. I have found this book discarded in master's study, most pages still blank. I take it at great risk. If discovered with it, I would face severe punishment. But I must write. I must remember I am human when all around me conspire to make me forget." When she was approximately 11 years old, Mercy had been purchased by Jonathan Ellsworth. 1250, unlike the field hands, she worked in the main house, primarily in the kitchen and tending to the needs of the Ellsworth daughters. Over years, how Master Ellsworth's behavior toward Mercy changed from indifference to interest to something much darker was described in the journal. Reportedly, an entry from 1786 stated, "Master watched me as I served dinner today, not as he usually watches to find fault or ensure proper service, but differently. 1321, his eyes followed my movements in a way that made my skin crawl. Mistress noticed nothing, engrossed in conversation with Miss Elizabeth about her piano lessons. Later, as I cleared the dessert plates, Master's hand brushed mine. I do not believe it was accidental." The psychological torment of a woman trapped in circumstances beyond her control was documented in sparse, careful handwriting in entries spanning several years, the journal reportedly contained. 1350, entries described how she was forced to smile while serving dinner to the family that owned her body, how she was summoned to the master's study late at night when Mrs. Ellsworth was away, how the daughters Elizabeth and Sarah learned to look through her as if she were nothing more than a piece of furniture even as she dressed them each morning, even as she knew their most intimate secrets. 1416, one entry, dated August 1787, reportedly read, "Miss Elizabeth found my hiding place today. Not this journal, thank Providence, but the small box where I keep the ribbon Mary gave me before they sold her away. Miss Elizabeth took the ribbon and laughed when I asked for its return. She said, 'Nothing is yours here, Mercy, not even your name.' 1440, tonight I watched her from the doorway as she slept, the ribbon tied around her wrist. I stood there for an hour, perhaps more. She never stirred. She never knew I was there. This thought brings me comfort when nothing else does." According to the graduate student's notes, the most disturbing entries detailed how the Ellsworth daughters began to mimic their father's cruelty as they grew older. 1504, how 15-year-old Elizabeth would deliberately spill ink on freshly laundered linens, claiming clumsiness when her mother questioned the waste. How 13-year-old Sarah would pinch and scratch while being dressed, then claim Mercy had been rough with her, resulting in punishments. An entry from February 1788 described, "Master had me whipped today because Miss Sarah said I pulled her hair while dressing it. 10 lashes." 1533, Cook helped clean the wounds and said nothing, but her eyes spoke volumes. She has been here 30 years and says the master's father was the same. I asked her how she endures. She said, I am not here. My body works. My hands serve, but I am elsewhere. I am trying to learn this skill. Another entry, from September 1788, detailed an incident involving Elizabeth. 1602, Miss Elizabeth's dog died today. The small spaniel she received for her birthday last year. She found it stiff in its basket this morning and wept inconsolably. Master and mistress comforted her, promising a new puppy when the tailor's bitch whelps next month. At dinner, Miss Elizabeth announced that I had poisoned her dog because I was jealous of her affection for it. 1627, there was no truth to this, but Master believed her without question. I was locked in the root cellar without food. As Miss Elizabeth passed the cellar door, I heard her whisper, "That's for watching me sleep, Mercy." She knows. She has known all along. Not just the violence that eventually erupted, but the years of psychological warfare that preceded it is what makes this case particularly haunting. 1651, how Mercy became expert at maintaining two separate selves was described in the journal. The obedient, silent servant visible to the Ellsworths, and her true self, visible only in the rare moments of solitude when she could write in her hidden journal. I have become two people, one entry from 1789 reportedly read. The Mercy they see moves through the house like a ghost. 1717, eyes downcast, voice soft, hands always busy. But inside lives another Mercy who watches, remembers, and waits. This Mercy notices everything, how Master favors his right knee when the weather turns, how Miss Elizabeth fears spiders, how Miss Sarah cannot sleep without her special pillow, how the mistress takes laudanum for her headaches. 1741, this Mercy collects these observations like others might collect pretty stones or feathers, storing them away for a time when they might be useful. Mercy's growing awareness of her divided self, a psychological splitting that allowed her to endure the daily trauma of her existence, was documented in the journal. An entry from April 1789 reportedly stated, Cook says I have changed. 1806, she says my eyes have gone cold even when I smile. I told her it is because I have learned her trick, to be elsewhere while my body remains. She shook her head and said, be careful, child. Sometimes the part that goes away doesn't come back, or worse, it comes back changed. I do not understand her concern. The part that goes away is the only part that remains truly mine. 1828, early to Georgia in 1789, winter came. Additional blankets and firewood in late October, unusual for the typically mild Georgia climate, are noted in purchases recorded in the plantation ledgers preserved in the Georgia Historical Society archives. The unseasonable cold is mentioned in a letter from Jonathan Ellsworth to a business associate in Charleston, dated November 3, 1789. 1855, we have experienced frost these past 3 nights, a full month earlier than expected. The cotton harvest was fortunately complete, but I fear for the winter wheat if these conditions persist. The house is damnably cold despite constant fires. Martha complains of chills and has taken to her bed on several occasions. For Charleston in late November, leaving her husband and daughters at the plantation, Mrs. Ellsworth had departed. 1921, her correspondence, partially preserved in the Charleston Museum archives, indicates she was visiting her ailing mother and expected to return after Christmas. Dated December 5, 1789, a letter to her husband expresses concern about leaving him and the girls for so long. I pray you are managing well in my absence. 1943, please ensure Elizabeth continues her piano practice, as she is inclined to neglect it when not supervised. I worry also about Sarah's cough. Please have Cook prepare the honey and white root tea as I instructed before my departure. Mother's condition shows slight improvement, though Dr. Reynolds remains cautious in his prognosis. 2005, I hope to return to you by 12th night if her recovery continues. Between Martha Ellsworth and her family, this would be the last communication. As increasingly fragmented and difficult to follow, suggesting a mind under extreme duress, the journal's final entries from early December were described by the graduate student. 2027, more erratic reportedly became the handwriting, the entries shorter and less coherent. Only the repeated phrase, They do not see me. They do not see me. They do not see me, was contained on one page. Dated December 6, 1789, an entry read, "Master came to my pallet last night. Afterward, he spoke of selling me. He says a plantation owner in New Orleans has offered a good price for a house servant with my skills. 2053, he says I'm becoming troublesome, that my eyes show disrespect. I can read your thoughts in your face, Mercy," he said. "You forget your place." I said nothing. I have learned that silence is my only shield. But inside, the other Mercy screamed. Dated December 8, 1789, another entry read, "Miss Elizabeth took my hidden knife today, the small one I used to cut herbs. 2122, she found it under my pallet and brought it to Master. He asked where I got it. I said cook gave it to me for kitchen work. He called me a liar. Said slaves steal things to run away or do harm. He had me held down in the yard while he pressed the blade against my cheek just below my eye. Should I mark you, Mercy?" he asked. 2140, "So everyone knows what you are." Miss Sarah watched from the porch, her face showing nothing. Miss Elizabeth smiled. I did not cry out. I would not give them that satisfaction. Later, cook found me behind the kitchen house. She said nothing about my face, only pressed a small cloth packet into my hand. "For sleep," she whispered. 2202, strong enough for the largest man. Her eyes told me the rest. What appeared to be calculations, amounts, measurements, timings, was consisted of an entry from December 9th, kitchen house, 50 yards from quarters. New moon tonight, no lanterns needed. Kettle capacity tested with pig carcass last month during slaughter. 6 to 8 hours at steady heat. 2224, wood supply sufficient. Thomas on night watch will look other way for promised payment. Time between last serving and first light, 11 hours. Sufficient. Reportedly, the last coherent entry read, "They do not see me as I prepare their meals. They do not notice what I put in their tea. They do not hear me at night. They believe they own all that I am, but they are mistaken." 2248, "There are parts of me they cannot reach, cannot touch, cannot own. And it is from these places that I now act." From fragmented evidence and the testimonies of the other enslaved persons given months later when the bone fragments were discovered, the events that followed can only be pieced together. Significant gaps and contradictions, however, are contained in these testimonies, suggesting either genuine ignorance or a collective decision to protect Mercy. 2318, based on the available evidence, what seems most likely is that on the night of December 10, 1789, Mercy served the family their evening meal, a meal that may have contained some form of sedative derived from local plants. Her knowledge of herbs and roots, learned from an older woman on the plantation who maintained the medicinal garden, was mentioned in the journal. 2339, extensively during the investigation, the plantation's cook, an elderly woman known only as Old Sarah in the records, was questioned. According to Magistrate Pendleton's notes, she claimed to have left the kitchen early that evening due to a misery in her joints. Unusual but not unprecedented, she stated that Mercy had prepared the family's evening meal alone. 2400 hours 04, about what was served, when pressed, Old Sarah reportedly could not recall, though she did mention that Master Ellsworth had requested his favorite apple tart for dessert. According to plantation records, the menu for that evening consisted of roast duck, winter root vegetables, fresh bread, and the aforementioned apple tart. 2400 hours 26, to accompany the meal, a bottle of Madeira wine imported from Charleston the previous month was opened. Later examined by investigators, the kitchen stores were found to contain nothing unusual or suspect among the ingredients. If used, a sedative left no trace. The family retired earlier than usual that evening, according to the testimony of Daniel, a house servant responsible for tending the fireplaces. 2400 hours 52, during dinner, he reported seeing Master Ellsworth yawn repeatedly and hearing Miss Sarah complain of feeling strange and heavy. After lighting the bedroom fires, something that Mercy typically supervised, Daniel was dismissed for the night. Nothing unusual about her demeanor was reported by him, stating only that she seemed quieter than usual, but Mercy was always quiet. 25:14, once the family was incapacitated, it appears Mercy somehow transported them one by one to the kitchen house. Unclear remain the physical logistics of this, as Mercy was described as small in stature. Though no evidence conclusively supports this theory, some historians suggest she may have had help. For December 10, preserved in the plantation records, the labor roster shows that 4 male field hands were unaccounted for during the evening head count. 25:48, as was sometimes required during colder months, the overseer stated that he assumed they were completing additional work in the tobacco drying shed when questioned. Never directly implicated in the investigation were these 4 men, Thomas, Isaac, Benjamin, and Elijah, but their absence from regular quarters that night remains a notable coincidence. 26:10, among historians who have studied this case, has been the subject of debate what followed. An act of extreme violence is suggested by the physical evidence, the bone fragments in the rendering kettle. Yet a contradiction is presented by the lack of blood or signs of struggle in the main house. In a now rare monograph published by Emory University in 1966, the most consistent theory suggests that the victims may have been already dead or near death before being placed in the kettle, perhaps from poisoning rather than from the heat itself. 26:46, to several documented cases of plant-based poisons available in the region that could have produced such an effect, particularly when combined with alcohol, which Master Ellsworth was known to consume regularly with his evening meal, points the author, Dr. Margaret Wellesley. Dr. Wellesley writes, "The journal's reference to something for sleep suggests the possibility of a sedative or poison derived from native plants." 27:14, the region's indigenous populations had extensive knowledge of such substances, knowledge that was often shared with or observed by enslaved persons. Datura stramonium jimsonweed, hemlock, water hemlock, black cohosh, and certain mushroom varieties were all available in Georgia and known to produce effects ranging from drowsiness to paralysis to death when properly prepared and administered. 27:40, she continues, "If the victims were already deceased or deeply unconscious when the rendering process began, it would explain the lack of disturbance in the main house and the absence of reported sounds from the kitchen house that night. The rendering process itself would have effectively eliminated most evidence of poisoning, as the extended heat would break down most toxins beyond detection by methods available at that time." 28:10, hours would have been taken by the rendering process itself, a slow, methodical procedure typically used to break down animal fat for soap making. Throughout the night, constant attention would have been required by the large copper kettle suspended over a carefully maintained fire to maintain the precise temperature needed. Rather than render, the contents would burn if too hot, fail to break down the organic material completely if too cool. 28:32, according to inventory records from the plantation, the kettle itself was a substantial piece of equipment approximately 4 feet in diameter and 3 feet deep, capable of rendering hundreds of pounds of material at once. 28:52, for the plantation, a significant investment was represented by it, typically used once or twice a year for converting animal fat into soap and candles. All the more disturbing are the logistics of Mercy's actions given the size and permanence of the kettle. This was not an impulsive act, but one requiring planning and determination. According to plantation records, no one reported hearing screams or unusual sounds from the kitchen house that night, despite its proximity to the slave quarters. 29:21, approximately 200 yards from the kitchen house, the quarters housed 20 other enslaved persons, many of whom might have noticed unusual activity. Either a conspiracy of silence or, perhaps more chillingly, that the normal sounds of plantation life had conditioned them to ignore cries of distress is suggested by their collective silence on this matter, even under threat of punishment. 29:48, little recognizable remaining would have been there by morning. To base components, fat, bone, and residue, the rendering process, when complete, reduces organic matter. Easy to dispose of, these would have been, particularly on a large plantation with numerous outbuildings and wooded areas. Overlooked in the haste of cleaning the equipment were likely the bone fragments found months later. 30:12, in the seams and joints of the large kettle, tiny pieces lodged. What happened after is perhaps the most chilling aspect of this case. Almost normally, life on the plantation continued the next day, according to the testimonies given months later. That the master and his daughters had been unexpectedly called away to Charleston to join Mrs. Ellsworth was informed by Mercy to the house slaves, they reported. 30:37, in their absence, she managed the household, maintaining all routines, even serving meals in the main house, though no one was there to eat them. That on December 11th, Mercy instructed her to change the linens in the family bedrooms as usual, testified Mary, a young house slave who assisted with laundry. 30:58, she had me air the mattresses and put fresh sheets on all 3 beds, Mary stated. She said master wanted everything to be perfect when they returned from Charleston. I asked when that would be, and she said she didn't know, but we must keep everything ready. That Mercy had him polish the silver on December 12th, a task typically performed under Mrs. Ellsworth's supervision, reported James the butler. 31:20, she was very particular about it, he testified. Said, every piece must shine. When I asked why, with no one home to see it, she said, we continue as we always have. Nothing has changed. There was something in her eyes that kept me from questioning further. For nearly 3 days, this facade continued before the neighboring plantation owner noticed the unusual lack of activity and sent his men to investigate. 31:49, by then, Mercy was gone. Before dawn on December 13th, Isaiah, a stable hand, reported seeing Mercy leaving the property. Preserved in Magistrate Pendleton's notes, according to his testimony, she was wearing a man's coat and carrying a small bundle. To deliver a message to Mrs. Ellsworth in Charleston, she had been sent, she told him, he claimed. 32:11, when he offered to saddle a horse for her, she declined, saying she preferred to walk to the main road where she would catch a wagon heading south. Unusual this seemed, Isaiah noted, but he did not question her further. On the plantation, he was the last person to report seeing Mercy. That he discovered Mercy's absence during the morning count on December 13th testified the plantation overseer, John Bedford. 32:39, I sent a boy to the house to fetch her, thinking she had overslept, he stated. He returned, saying her pallet was empty and her few possessions gone. I assumed she had run off in the night and was preparing to organize a search when the men from the Hargrove plantation arrived asking about the lack of activity at the main house. 32:59, that a search was mounted is indicated by county records, but no trace of Mercy was ever officially found. No knowledge of her whereabouts or plans was claimed by the other enslaved persons. Though the journey would have been nearly impossible for a woman alone in winter, some suggested she might have fled north toward free territories. Another possibility is suggested by the journal, if authentic. 33:22, careful calculations, distances, supplies needed, routes to take, not northward but south and west into Spanish Florida, where communities of escaped slaves had established settlements in the difficult terrain, reportedly were contained in its final pages. About moon phases were included these calculations, suggesting Mercy had been planning her escape for some time and was waiting for the optimal conditions. 33:50, the darkest nights for travel would have been provided by the new moon of mid-December. Along the Georgia-Florida border, including a lightning-struck oak and a bend in the river where 3 large rocks stand like sentinels, were also references to specific landmarks. That several communities of escaped slaves did exist in Spanish Florida during this period is confirmed by historical records. 34:14, known as Maroons, these communities often formed alliances with Seminole Indians and established settlements in remote areas. Often provided sanctuary to escaped slaves, even offering land grants and protection in exchange for loyalty to the Spanish crown, were the Spanish authorities, eager to destabilize the English and later American territories to their north. 34:38, after her disappearance, what became of Mercy remains unknown. No official record of her capture exists, no death certificate, no further mention in any known historical document until the appearance of the journal in 1952, suggesting that she did indeed escape and establish a new life elsewhere under a new identity. 35:02, in the spring of 1790, the Ellsworth plantation was eventually sold. Closer to the main residence, the new owners, the Henderson family, demolished the kitchen house and built a new one. They reported no unusual occurrences, though servants were said to avoid the root cellar where the rings were found. Before selling and moving west as cotton depleted the soil, The Hendersons prospered on the property for nearly 30 years, according to local newspaper accounts from the early 1800s. 35:32, after learning of her family's disappearance, Mrs. Martha Ellsworth never returned to Georgia. According to Charleston records, she became increasingly reclusive and died in 1801, having never remarried or recovered from the loss. With the stipulation that regular prayers be said for the souls of her husband and daughters, her will, preserved in the Charleston County Courthouse, left her considerable personal fortune to the Episcopal Church. 36:01, intriguingly, a codicil added shortly before her death specified that a small sum be set aside for the education and welfare of colored children born free in the state of South Carolina. Among her remaining relatives, this unexpected provision caused some controversy, but was eventually honored. Whether this represented a change of heart regarding the institution of slavery or was motivated by other factors remains a matter of speculation. 36:33, into her final years provides some insight. A letter from Martha's brother, William Blackwood, to a cousin in Virginia dated 1800. Martha has become a shadow of her former self. She rarely leaves her rooms and speaks little, even to me. The servants say she often wakes in the night crying out for Elizabeth and Sarah. 36:56, most disturbing is her fixation on the woman Mercy. She speaks of her sometimes as if she were still present, asking if I have seen her about the house. When reminded that Mercy is long gone, she falls silent, but her eyes reflect a terrible knowing. I fear my sister's mind has been irreparably damaged by her losses. Until the discovery of the bone fragments and later the journal, the case fell into obscurity. 37:22, even then, outside academic circles studying the psychological impacts of slavery, it received little attention. On the case, a paper was attempted to be published by the graduate student who accessed the journal in 1968, but the work was rejected by several historical journals for insufficient evidence and potentially sensationalistic interpretations. 37:44, what troubles me most is not the horror of the act itself, but the environment that produced it, wrote the student in a letter to a colleague preserved in the University of Georgia archives. The journal describes years of psychological torture, the constant dehumanization, the casual cruelty, the complete denial of personal autonomy. 38:06, the physical violence, terrible as it was, seems almost secondary to the systematic destruction of a human being's sense of self. If the journal is authentic, and I believe it is, it provides a window into the psychological mechanisms that allowed slavery to function and the terrible price paid by those trapped within it. 38:40, the student continued, most disturbing is the progression visible in the journal entries, the gradual transformation of a traumatized but essentially normal psyche into something fractured and compartmentalized. The early entries show fear, confusion, and pain. The middle entries show the development of a split consciousness as a survival mechanism. The final entries show something else entirely, a cold calculation, a methodical planning, a complete disconnection from normal emotional responses. 39:10, it is as if the very system that sought to dehumanize Mercy succeeded, but in doing so created something far more dangerous than a broken spirit. Not what happened in that kitchen house on a December night in 1789, but rather what preceded it is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this case. Of the human capacity to compartmentalize, to create separate selves as a survival mechanism, and ultimately the potential for these fractured selves to take desperate action when pushed beyond endurance, a picture is painted by the years of psychological torment documented in the journal, if accurate. 39-38, that reads less like a confession and more like a declaration was contained in the journal's final pages, according to the graduate student's notes. I have rendered them down to their essence, as they rendered down mine. I have reduced them to their base elements, as they reduced me to property. What remains of them is no more than what remained of me. 40:02, fragments that can no longer be made whole. Yet I remain. I continue. I escaped not just this place, but the person they tried to make me become. When the kettle was full, I felt nothing, the passage continues. Not triumph, not horror, not guilt, only a profound emptiness where those emotions should have been. 40:24, is this what they wanted? A being without feeling? If so, they succeeded too well. They created in me a perfect vessel for their destruction. I watch the flames beneath the kettle and think, this is what they taught me. This is what they made me. And in their final lesson, they have freed me. On the authenticity of the journal, historians remain divided. 40:48, as an attempt to sensationalize an otherwise mundane disappearance, some argue it may have been a fabrication created much later. That align with documented plantation practices and specific events in Georgia during that period, details that would have been difficult to fabricate without intimate knowledge of the time and place, are pointed to by others in details in the text. 41:14, before its disappearance, several pages of the journal were examined in photographs by Dr. Eleanor Whitfield, a historian specializing in early American documents. That the handwriting, paper composition, and ink formulation appeared consistent with late 18th century materials she noted in a paper published in 1967. 41:37, of the period, particularly those associated with individuals who learned to write outside formal education, she also highlighted several linguistic patterns in the text that aligned with documented speech patterns. The journal displays certain characteristics that would be difficult to falsify, Dr. Whitfield wrote. 42:11, the handwriting shows a distinctive progression from hesitant, carefully formed letters in the earliest entries to a more fluid, confident hand in later pages, consistent with someone improving their writing skills over time. Additionally, the text contains syntax patterns and vocabulary consistent with the English spoken by enslaved persons in coastal Georgia during the late 18th century, including several terms of African origin that had not been widely documented in published sources at the time the journal surfaced. 42:31, no longer can be examined, the journal itself, having disappeared from the Historical Society archives sometime in the early 1970s. A catalogue card remains, but the document is listed as missing, presumed lost during facility renovations. From theft by collectors of rare documents to deliberate suppression by those uncomfortable.